The smoke rose from the burning city like black fingers reaching toward the purple sky of Zarian Prime, Marine. Sergeant Jake Morrison crawled out from under the twisted metal of what used to be a Coalition transport ship. His ears rang from the explosion that had torn his unit apart just minutes before they could escape the planet. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead as he looked around at the wreckage scattered across the alien landscape. Jake checked his rifle and counted his remaining ammunition. 2 clips left and a handful of emergency rations. Not much for staying alive on a hostile world where the enemy controlled everything. He could hear the distant sound of Vorthak aircraft patrolling the skies, hunting for survivors like him. The metallic screech of their engines sent chills down his spine. The Coalition had lost this battle badly. What was supposed to be a simple evacuation of civilian populations had turned into a massacre when the Vorthak Empire launched a surprise attack. Jake's unit had been assigned to protect a group of refugee ships when everything went wrong. Now, he was alone on a planet full of enemies with no way to call for help. He moved carefully through the ruins of what had once been a beautiful alien settlement. The buildings were made of some kind of crystalline material that reflected light in amazing colors, but now most of them lay in pieces. Bodies of different alien species were scattered everywhere, telling the story of what had happened here. The Vorthak showed no mercy to anyone who got in their way. Jake had been fighting these creatures for 3 years now, ever since they started their conquest of the Outer Rim worlds. They were tall and covered in dark scales, with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Their weapons could cut through Coalition armor like paper, and they never took prisoners. Every world they conquered became a graveyard dot as he walked. Through the devastation, Jake tried to push down the anger and sadness that threatened to overwhelm him. He had seen too many worlds like this one. Too many innocent people killed for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Vorthak called it cleansing, but Jake knew it was just murder on a massive scale. A small sound caught his attention. It was faint, almost like a whimper, coming from beneath a pile of rubble that had once been a residential building. Jake stopped and listened carefully. There it was again, definitely the sound of someone in distress. He looked around to make sure no enemies were nearby, then started moving the broken pieces of wall and debris. The work was hard and dangerous. One wrong move could bring the whole pile down on top of him. But Jake had heard that sound before on other worlds where the Vorthak had struck. It was the sound of someone who had lost everything and was hanging on to life by a thread. He could not walk away from it. After several minutes of careful digging, Jake found what he was looking for. Huddled in a small space beneath a fallen beam was a child unlike anything he had ever seen. She was small and delicate, with skin that glowed faintly violet in the dim light. Her large eyes were the color of deep ocean water, and they stared at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Jake recognized her species immediately. She was Kellari, one of the most peaceful races in the galaxy. The Kellari were known for their empathic abilities and their beautiful art and music. They had never hurt anyone, but that had not saved them from the Vorthak war machine. Jake had heard reports that entire Kellari worlds had been wiped out in the past few months. The little girl clutched something close to her chest. Jake could see it was a stuffed animal of some kind, worn and dirty from being carried everywhere. She was shaking, whether from fear or cold or both, and her breathing was shallow and quick. Dark stains on her clothes suggested she had been hurt, though Jake could not tell how badly. When Jake reached toward her, she pressed herself back against the wall and made a soft sound that might have been words in her own language. Her eyes never left his face, studying him with the intensity that only a frightened child could manage. Jake realized she had probably never seen a human before, and after what she had been through, any adult would seem terrifying. Jake slowly pulled off his helmet and set it aside. He tried to make his voice as gentle as possible when he spoke. "Hey there, little one. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." The words felt strange in his mouth. He was used to giving orders and shouting commands, not comforting scared children. The girl did not seem to understand his words, but something in his tone must have reached her. She stopped pressing against the wall, though she still watched. Him with those huge, frightened eyes. Jake noticed that her injuries were not as bad as he had first thought. Cuts and bruises mostly, though she was clearly exhausted and hungry. Jake pulled out one of his emergency rations and unwrapped it slowly, making sure she could see what he was doing. He broke off a small piece and held it out to her. The girl stared at the food for a long moment, then looked back at his face. Hunger finally won over fear, and she reached out with one small hand to take the piece of food. As she ate, Jake tried to figure out what to do next. He could not leave her here. The Vorthak would find her eventually, and they would kill her without a second thought. But taking her with him would make his own chances of survival much worse. He would have to move slowly, find more food and water, and protect someone who could not protect herself. The sound of aircraft engines grew louder, and Jake realized the Vorthak patrols were getting closer. He had to make a decision now. Looking at the frightened child, he knew there was really no choice at all. He had taken an oath to protect innocent people, and that oath did not come with exceptions for difficult circumstances. Jake held out his hand to the girl. "Come on, kid. We need to get out of here." She looked at his hand for a moment, then at his face. Something she saw there must have convinced her, because she took his hand and let him help her out of the hiding place. They prepared to leave the ruined settlement behind. Jake wondered if he was saving her life or just postponing her death. Either way, he knew he had to try. In a galaxy full of darkness and cruelty, sometimes the only thing that mattered was refusing to give up on hope. Jake Morrison moved through the shadows of the broken city with the small alien girl walking beside him. She had not spoken a word since they left her hiding place, but she stayed close to him as they made their way through the ruins. Her tiny hand gripped his jacket sleeve whenever they had to cross open ground where the Vorthak patrols might see them. The girl was much smaller than Jake had first thought. She barely reached his waist, and her legs were so short that she had to take 3 steps for every one of his. This was going to make traveling much harder than he had hoped. Every minute they stayed in one place increased the chance that the enemy would find them. Jake stopped behind a collapsed wall and pulled out his field scanner. The device showed several heat signatures moving about 2 miles to the north. Vorthak search teams were working their way through the settlement methodically, checking every building and every hiding spot. They would reach this area within the hour. He looked down at the girl and tried to think of a way to communicate with her. Jake knew a few words in the common galactic language that most species used for trade, but he had never learned any Kalari. The girl watched him with those large blue eyes, seeming to understand that they were in danger even without words. Jake pointed to himself and said slowly, "Jake." Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows in question. The girl tilted her head and made a soft sound that might have been her name. It sounded like Zara to Jake's ears, so that was what he decided to call her. "Zara," he repeated, and she nodded. It was the first real communication they had managed, and Jake felt a small spark of hope. Maybe they could make this work after all. They continued moving south toward the mountains where Jake hoped to find better cover. Zara proved to be much tougher than she looked. She never complained about the pace, even when Jake could see she was getting tired. When they had to climb over obstacles, she found ways to manage on her own without slowing him down. As they walked, Jake began to notice something strange about Zara. Twice she had grabbed his arm and pulled him toward cover just before Vorthak aircraft appeared overhead. She seemed to sense danger before his own military training detected it. Jake wondered if this was part of the empathic abilities that Kalari were famous for. The third time it happened, Jake was convinced. Zara suddenly stopped walking and pressed herself against a wall, pulling on his jacket urgently. Jake could not see or hear anything wrong, but he trusted her instincts and followed her lead. They hid in the shadows of a ruined building just as a Vorthak patrol rounded the corner 50 meters away. The patrol consisted of 4 of the scaled creatures, each carrying weapons that could kill a human in seconds. They moved with the confidence of predators who knew they owned this territory. Jake held his breath as they passed by, close enough that he could smell the metallic scent of their armor after the patrol disappeared. Jake looked at Zara with new respect. She had just saved both their lives? He made a mental note to pay closer attention to her reactions from now on. Whatever ability she had, it was going to be crucial to their survival. They found temporary shelter in what had once been a school. The walls were still mostly standing, and there was a basement where they could hide during the day. Jake gave Zara some water from his canteen and watched her drink it slowly. She was being careful not to waste any, which told him she understood. How precious their supplies were. Jake tried to estimate how long his rations would last if he shared them with Zara. 3 days. Maybe 4 if they were very careful. That was not nearly enough time to reach the evacuation point, even if he knew where it was. He would have to find food and water somewhere, or they would both die of starvation before the Vorthik found them. While Zara rested, Jake explored the basement and found something that made him smile for the first time in days. The school had an emergency shelter stocked with basic supplies. There were water purification tablets, energy bars, and even a small medical kit. It was not much, but it could extend their survival time by several days. As Jake sorted through the supplies, he noticed Zara watching him with intense concentration. She seemed to be trying to understand what he was doing and why. When he held up a water purification tablet, she nodded as if she recognized it. Jake realized she was probably much smarter than he had given her credit for. That evening, as they shared a meal of energy bars and purified water, Jake tried to learn more about his young companion. He pointed to the stuffed animal she still carried and made a questioning sound. Zara hugged the toy closer and said something in her musical language. Jake could not understand the words, but he could hear the sadness in her voice. Jake pulled out his emergency beacon and showed it to Zara. He pointed to it and then to the sky, trying to explain that he was hoping for rescue. Zara looked at the device and then at Jake's face. She reached out and touched his hand gently, and Jake felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He wondered if she was using her empathic abilities to comfort him. Over the next 2 days, Jake and Zara developed a routine. They traveled at night when the Vorthik patrols were lighter, and they hid during the day in whatever shelter they could find. Zara's ability to sense danger kept them safe, while Jake's military training helped them avoid leaving tracks that could be followed. Jake began to understand that Zara was not just a helpless child he was protecting. She was his partner in this desperate journey, contributing her own unique skills to their survival. When they ran low on water, she led him to a hidden spring that his scanner had missed. When they needed a safe place to rest, she seemed to know which buildings were truly empty and which might contain traps. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Jake found himself talking to Zara even though she could not understand most of his words. She listened with the serious attention of someone much older, and sometimes she would respond with gestures or sounds that seemed to fit the conversation perfectly. Jake realized that somewhere along the way, his mission had changed. He was no longer just trying to survive long enough to be rescued. He was determined to get Zara to safety, no matter what it cost him. She had become the most important thing in his world, and he would protect her with his life. Jake Morrison crouched behind a broken wall and watched the Vorthik patrol move through the valley below. There were more of them now, at least 20 creatures spread out in a search pattern that covered every possible hiding spot. They were getting closer to finding Jake and Zara with each passing hour. The little Kalari girl pressed against his side, her small body trembling as she sensed the dangerous emotions radiating from the enemy soldiers. Jake could feel her fear, but he also noticed something else. Zara was learning to control her empathic abilities, using them to help them both stay alive. She had become his early warning system, alerting him to threats before his human senses could detect them. They had been running for 5 days now, and the constant stress was wearing on both of them. Jake's supplies were almost gone, and Zara was showing signs of exhaustion. Dark circles appeared under her large eyes, and she moved more slowly than before. Jake knew they needed to find shelter soon, or the chase would end with their capture. The Vorthik patrol passed by without seeing them, but Jake noticed they were using new tactics. They had brought tracking animals with them, creatures that looked like a cross between a dog and a lizard. These beasts could follow scent trails that were days old, making it much harder for Jake and Zara to stay hidden. Jake studied his map and realized they were being herded toward the eastern mountains. Every time they tried to change direction, Vorthek patrols appeared to block their path. The enemy commander was smart, using the natural terrain to limit their options. Soon they would be trapped against the mountain wall with nowhere left to run. As they moved through the afternoon, Jake noticed that Zara was struggling more than usual. She stumbled several times and had to stop to catch her breath. When he knelt down to check on her, he saw that her violet skin had taken on a pale, sickly color. Her breathing was shallow and quick, and she felt warm to the touch. Jake realized with growing alarm that Zara was getting sick. The stress of their journey, combined with poor food and little rest, was taking its toll on her small body. He needed to find medicine and a safe place for her to recover, but they were in the middle of enemy territory with no resources. They found temporary shelter in a cave system that wound deep into the mountainside. Jake carried Zara when she became too weak to walk, her small form feeling disturbingly light in his arms. He found a chamber far from the entrance where they could rest without being discovered. Jake made a bed for Zara from his extra clothing and gave her the last of his water. She drank it slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. Even though she could not speak his language, Jake could see the trust in her expression. She believed he would take care of her, and that faith both comforted and terrified him. While Zara slept, Jake explored the cave system and made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in a side chamber was an abandoned research station, probably left behind when the Vorthak first invaded. The equipment was still functional, powered by a small fusion cell that showed several months of life remaining. Jake activated the computer terminal and found medical supplies in a storage locker. There were antibiotics, pain medication, and nutrition supplements that might help Zara recover. More importantly, he found a communication array that could send messages across the galaxy. For the first time since the crash, Jake had hope of calling for rescue. As he worked to repair the communication system, Jake discovered files containing information about the Kalari people. He learned that they were one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, with a history of art and philosophy that stretched back thousands of years. Their empathic abilities made them natural healers and counselors, helping other species resolve conflicts peacefully. The files also contained terrible news. The Vorthak had systematically targeted Kalari worlds, viewing their peaceful nature as weakness. Entire planets had been destroyed, and the population had been reduced from billions to just a few thousand survivors scattered across the galaxy. Zara might be one of the last members of her species. Jake felt a surge of anger at the senseless destruction of such a beautiful culture. The Kalari had never hurt anyone, had never posed a threat to the Vorthak Empire. They had been killed simply because they existed, because they represented something the Vorthak could not understand or control. When Zara woke up, Jake gave her medicine and tried to explain what he had found. She seemed to understand that the research station was important, and she watched with interest as he worked on the communication equipment. Her fever had broken, and she was already looking stronger. Jake managed to establish contact with a coalition rescue ship called the Defender. The captain, a woman named Lisa Hayes, confirmed that rescue operations were still ongoing despite the Vorthak occupation. She could reach them, but only if they could make it to a specific extraction point in the northern mountains. The journey to the extraction point would take 3 days through the most dangerous part of Vorthak territory. Jake studied the route and realized they would have to cross several valleys where enemy patrols were heaviest. It would be almost impossible to avoid detection, especially with Zara still recovering from her illness. As Jake prepared for the dangerous journey ahead, he noticed that Zara was watching him with a new expression. The trust was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. She seemed to understand that he was risking everything to save her, and that knowledge had changed something between them. That night, as they rested in the cave, Zara did something that surprised Jake. She reached out and took his hand, then placed it over her heart. She spoke softly in her musical language, words that Jake could not understand but whose meaning was clear. She was thanking him, and she was promising too. Be brave. Jake felt something shift inside his chest. This was no longer just about protecting an innocent child or following his military oath. Zara had become family to him, the little sister he had never had. He would get her to safety or die trying, because losing her would be like losing a part of himself. The next morning, Jake and Zara left the cave and began the most dangerous part of their journey. Behind them, the Vorthak hunting parties were closing in, their tracking animals following the scent trail that would lead them straight to the research station. Ahead lay 3 days of terror through enemy territory, with only a slim chance of reaching the extraction point alive. Jake checked his weapon and looked down at Zara. She nodded up at him with determination that belonged on someone much older. Together, they stepped out into the morning light and began their race against time. Jake Morrison and Zara moved through the darkness of the northern valley, staying close to the rocky walls where the shadows were deepest. The extraction point was still 2 days away, but Jake could already hear the sound of aircraft engines in the distance. Captain Hayes had confirmed that the rescue ship Defender was approaching the planet, but she could only wait 12 hours before Vorthak reinforcements would force her to leave. The pressure was building with every step they took. Jake's communication device crackled with regular updates from the rescue team, each message more urgent than the last. Vorthak ships were moving into position around the extraction point, and the window for escape was closing fast. Zara walked beside Jake with the quiet determination she had shown throughout their journey. Her illness had passed, but she was still weak from days of poor food and little rest. Jake could see her struggling to keep up, though she never complained or asked him to slow down. Her courage reminded him why he was willing to risk everything to save her. As they climbed a steep ridge, Jake's scanner detected movement ahead. A Vorthak patrol was stationed at the top of the hill, blocking their path to the extraction point. Jake counted 6 enemy soldiers, too many for him to fight alone. He would have to find another way around, even though it would cost them precious time. Jake led Zara down into a narrow canyon that wound between the hills. The route was longer and more dangerous, but it was their only option. As they walked, Jake tried to contact Captain Hayes again, but the rocky walls blocked his signal. They were on their own until they reached higher ground. The canyon was filled with strange alien plants that glowed softly in the darkness. Zara seemed fascinated by them, reaching out to touch their luminescent leaves. Jake realized she had probably never seen anything like them before. Her world had been destroyed when she was still very young, and most of her life had been spent hiding from the Vorthak. A sound from behind made Jake freeze. It was the metallic clank of Vorthak armor echoing off the canyon walls. The enemy had found their trail and was following them into the narrow passage. Jake looked ahead and saw that the canyon ended at a steep cliff face. They were trapped? Jake quickly scanned the area and spotted a small cave entrance about halfway up the cliff wall. It was their only chance. He pointed to the cave and whispered to Zara, "We have to climb." She nodded and followed him as he began, scaling the rocky surface, using cracks and ledges to pull himself upward. The climb was harder than Jake had expected. The rock was loose and crumbly, and several times he nearly lost his grip. Zara climbed behind him, her small size actually, helping her find handholds that Jake could barely reach. They made it to the cave just as the first Vorthak soldiers appeared at the bottom of the canyon. The cave was shallow and offered little protection, but it was better than being caught in the open. Jake positioned himself at the entrance with his rifle while Zara huddled behind him. The Vorthak soldiers below were searching for their trail, using handheld scanners to track their movement. One of the soldiers looked up and spotted the cave entrance. He pointed and barked orders in the harsh Vorthak language. Jake knew they had been discovered. The soldiers began climbing the cliff face, moving with the confidence of predators who had cornered their prey. Jake made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He turned to Zara and pressed his communication device into her small hands. "Take this," he whispered. "When I tell you to run, you go deeper into the cave and keep going until you find another way out. Contact Captain Hayes and tell her where you are." Zara looked at the device and then at Jake's face. Her empathic abilities must have told her what he was planning, because her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head and tried to give the communicator back to him, but Jake gently pushed her hands away. "You have to survive," Jake said softly. "Your people need you to live and remember them. Promise me you'll run when I tell you to." The first Vorthok soldier reached the cave entrance, his weapon raised and ready to fire. Jake opened fire, catching the creature by surprise and sending it tumbling back down the cliff. The other soldiers responded with a barrage of energy blasts that lit up the cave entrance like lightning. Jake fought with everything he had, using his military training and the advantage of high ground to hold off the attackers. But there were too many of them, and his ammunition was running low. He could hear more soldiers climbing the cliff, surrounding the cave from multiple directions. A Vorthok commander appeared at the cave entrance, larger and more heavily armed than the others. This was Thok, the same creature who had been hunting them since the beginning. His yellow eyes glowed with satisfaction as he realized he had finally trapped his prey. "Human soldier," Thok spoke in broken Galactic Common. "You come out now. Bring the small one, no more running." Jake fired his last shots and then threw his empty rifle aside. He could hear Zara crying softly behind him, and he knew she understood what was about to happen. The Vorthok soldiers poured into the cave, their weapons trained on Jake as he slowly raised his hands. Thok stepped forward and grabbed Jake by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one clawed hand. "You caused much trouble, human. Now, you tell me about your military positions, your rescue ships, your hidden bases." Jake met the creature's gaze and smiled. "I'll tell you everything you want to know," he said calmly. "But the girl doesn't know anything. Let her go." Thok laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "The small one dies with you. But first you answer questions." The Vorthok commander dragged Jake out of the cave and down the cliff face. The soldiers searched for Zara but found no trace of her. Jake had managed to give her enough time to escape deeper into the cave system, just as he had planned. Jake endured hours of torture as Thok tried to force information from him. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced, but he revealed nothing that could endanger other humans or compromise the rescue mission. His only thoughts were of Zara, hoping she was safe and moving toward the extraction point. As consciousness faded, Jake heard the sound of aircraft engines overhead. The rescue ship had arrived, and somewhere in the mountains, a small alien girl was making her way toward freedom. He had kept his promise to protect her, and that knowledge gave him strength, even in his darkest hour. Zara crawled through the narrow tunnel deep inside the mountain, her small hands bleeding from the rough stone walls. Jake's communication device pressed against her chest as she moved, the only connection she had to the rescue ship waiting somewhere. Above, tears ran down her violet cheeks, but she kept moving forward just as Jake had told her to do. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, winding through the mountain like a maze. Zara had been crawling for hours, following passages that led upward toward the surface. Her empathic abilities helped her choose the right path, sensing the life and warmth of the world above rather than the cold emptiness of dead ends behind her. She could still feel Jake's presence like a flickering candle in the darkness. He was alive but in terrible pain. A connection between them had grown so strong during their journey that she could sense his emotions even from this distance. She knew he was being hurt, and she knew he was doing it to protect her. Zara finally emerged from a crack in the mountainside, just as the first light of dawn touched the sky. She was only a few miles from the extraction point, but she could see Vorthok aircraft circling the area like hungry predators. The rescue would have to happen quickly, or the enemy would overwhelm the coalition forces. She activated Jake's communication device with shaking fingers, trying to remember how he had used it. Static filled the air for a moment, then a woman's voice came through clearly. "This is Captain Hayes of the rescue ship Defender. Who is this?" Zara tried to speak but only managed a soft whimper. The words were there in her mind, but they came out in her native Kalari language. She took a deep breath and tried again, using the few human words Jake had taught her. "Jake ... hurt," she managed to say. "Help, Jake." Captain Hayes' voice became urgent. "Are you the Kalari child?" Where is Sergeant Morrison? What's your location? Zara looked around, trying to find landmarks that Jake had shown her on his maps. She could see a distinctive rock formation that looked like a giant finger pointing at the sky. Big rock, she said into the device. Jake ... Vorthak take Jake. The communication went silent for a moment, then Captain Hayes spoke again. We're coming for you, little one. Stay hidden and keep this channel open. Zara found a hiding spot among the rocks and waited. She could feel Jake's presence growing weaker, and she knew he was running out of time. The pain he was experiencing made her own chest ache with sympathetic agony. She wanted to go back for him, but she remembered his final words about her people needing her to survive. The sound of engines filled the air as coalition dropships appeared over the mountain ridge. They moved fast and low, trying to avoid the Vorthak patrols. One ship broke away from the formation and headed straight for Zara's position. The dropship landed in a shower of dust and debris. The loading ramp dropped, and Captain Hayes herself stepped out, flanked by 2 Marine guards. She was a tall woman with kind eyes, and when she saw Zara huddled among the rocks, her expression filled with compassion. Come on, sweetheart, Captain, Hayes said gently, extending her hand. We're going to get you out of here. Zara ran to the captain and grabbed her hand, but she pulled back toward the mountains. Jake, she said desperately, save Jake. Captain Hayes knelt down to Zara's level and spoke softly. I know you want to help him, but we can't reach Sergeant Morrison without losing the ship and everyone on it. He knew this might happen. He made his choice to save you. Zara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Through her empathic connection, she could feel Jake's life slipping away. The Vorthak were killing him slowly, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The helplessness was worse than any physical pain she had ever experienced. Captain Hayes gently lifted Zara and carried her toward the dropship. As they reached the loading ramp, explosions erupted across the valley below. Jake had somehow escaped his captors and was creating a diversion, drawing the Vorthak forces away from the extraction point. Zara pressed her face against the dropship's window as they lifted off, watching the flashes of weapons fire in the distance. She could feel Jake's determination through their connection, his fierce joy at knowing she was safe. Even as his own life ended, he was thinking only of her survival. The last thing Zara sensed from Jake was not pain or fear, but a feeling of peace. He had kept his promise to protect her, and that knowledge gave meaning to his sacrifice. Their connection faded like a sunset, leaving Zara alone but alive. Years passed like flowing water. Zara grew from a frightened child into a young woman who carried the memory of her people and the love of a human soldier who had given everything to save her. She learned to speak many languages and became a bridge between the species of the galaxy, helping them understand each other as Jake had helped her. Understand that not all large creatures were dangerous. The war with the Vorthak eventually ended when their empire collapsed from within. Other species had learned from humanity's example that sometimes the greatest strength came from protecting the weak rather than conquering the strong. The galaxy began to heal, and new alliances formed between worlds that had once been enemies. Zara became the voice of her people, telling their stories and preserving their culture so it would never be completely lost. She worked with human diplomats and alien leaders, building the kind of peaceful future that Jake had fought to protect. On quiet evenings, Zara would sit alone and remember the human soldier who had found her in the ruins of her world. She would tell his story to anyone who would listen, making sure that Jake Morrison's name would be remembered long after the last star burned out. The galaxy was a better place, because one human had chosen compassion over survival, love over fear. Jake's sacrifice had saved more than just one small alien girl. It had saved the idea that different species could care for each other, protect each other, and build something beautiful together. Zara kept Jake's communication device as a reminder of the connection they had shared. Sometimes, in her dreams, she could still feel his presence watching over her. And in those moments, she knew that some bonds could never be broken, not even by death. The story of Jake and Zara became legend, passed down through generations as proof that heroes could be found in the darkest places and that hope could survive. even the greatest losses. Their journey together had lasted only days, but its impact would echo through eternity.